Okay, so this is going to read the new David developments change everything. It's the intro.
Yeah, police say they now consider the singer a suspect in her death and say they have better information about when she may have died.
Now, the new David, spelled d4vd, developments change everything. And I don't say that lightly, because according to sources with direct knowledge of the investigation, this case has now gone to a much deeper place than where it started. We first talked about the David story, spelled d4vd, back on September 10th, when all we had were headlines, confusion, and a single breaking news alert about a body found inside an impounded Tesla. Back then, nobody obviously understood the timeline, nobody knew who the victim was, and the entire situation felt like one giant question mark, especially because the name tied to that car belonged to a popular young singer nobody expected to see connected to something like this. Since then, a lot has been said, a lot has been assumed, and this has become one of the most confusing and emotionally charged stories I've personally covered on this channel, that's for sure. And of course, it involves a 14-year-old girl who lost her life, which makes the story even heavier to talk about. Now, my last video on this case a little over 3 weeks ago, I told you that I'd keep you updated the moment anything significant developed. And today I'm here to deliver that promise. My goal with this video is to explain why these new details are so significant and how they completely shift the timeline and direction of this investigation. So, let's get into it. Now, the first major thing we're going to talk about is that David has now been identified by investigators as a suspect in this case. And here's the thing, right? This is not an official stamp, because they do need probable cause with the help of all the evidence in order to do that on the record, and that's not the case, at least as with the help. And here's right, this is not an official stamp, because they do need probable cause with the help of all the evidence in order to do that on the record, and that's not the case, at least as of right now. So this does not mean that they have enough on David as of today to make an arrest. That's not where things are yet. But it does mean that detectives no longer see him as just someone connected to the car or a person they might want to question later. David is now considered a suspect, and this is pretty major. Up until now, most of the noise around this story came from commentators, journalists, and the internet trying to make sense of what happened. But when that confirmation comes from inside the investigation itself, that's very different, that carries weight. So what does that actually mean? It means investigators are no longer treating him as someone who just happens to be tied to a vehicle where the body was found. Yes, the Tesla was registered to David the whole time, but that alone doesn't automatically make someone a suspect. And in David's situation, that detail becomes even more complicated because with the level he was operating at, the management, the team around him, the people coming in and out of the places he stayed, we know that there were multiple individuals who potentially had access to his cars, his properties, and his general belongings. So investigators had to look deeper. People lend cars out, people borrow things, people come and go, and detectives obviously know that. They needed more than a registration to take the next step. Now, it does not mean that they've reached a conclusion. It does not mean he's guilty. And it does not mean an arrest is guaranteed or around the corner. But it does mean the investigation has now moved into a different phase. And according to sources with direct knowledge of the case, this wasn't something that happened overnight. Detectives have been working quietly behind the scenes for weeks, interviewing people close to the situation, cross-checking timelines, examining digital information, reviewing physical evidence, and this is the point where they felt like they had enough to place him in that category. And when you look back at how this entire story began, a body discovered inside the front trunk of a Tesla registered to him, this suspect classification becomes one of the most serious developments we've seen since the very beginning. This is the moment where the tone of the investigation shifts. This is when the pressure increases. And this is when detectives begin focusing in a lot more than before.
That happened months before her remains were found in the trunk of that Tesla on September 8th. And now the source also tells us that pop singer David is being considered a suspect in her death.
Now, connected to the suspect status, there's another major development investigators are focused on right now. Two separate law enforcement sources have told reporters that detectives do not believe this was a one-person job. According to those sources, investigators think a second individual was involved in the effort to dispose of Celeste's body during the months before she was found inside that Tesla. One source even said, confidently, that investigators believe that more than one person was involved in the handling of the teen's body in the months before her remains were found in that Tesla, according to two law enforcement sources familiar with the inquiry. So the fact that law enforcement sources are speaking that boldly is pretty crazy to me. So now the focus isn't just on what happened, it's on who else might have played a role in this thing. Who is this other person? A friend, someone in a circle maybe, or someone the public doesn't even know exists? As of right now, we don't have those answers yet. But when detectives believe a second person was involved, that tells you this wasn't one terrible moment or one impulsive decision. It suggests planning. It suggests coordination. It suggests someone else out there is holding secrets and staying quiet, at least for now. Because based on some things that we're going to talk about later on in the video, there are witnesses and even informants already cooperating with police behind the scenes. And this is according to law enforcement sources. So it's only a matter of time before those pieces connect. Now we're left with some heavy questions. How far does this thing actually extend? Who helped and why? If investigators are right about what they're claiming, this case goes way deeper than anyone imagined when the first headlines hit. And the thing about investigations like this is once detectives have that story lined up, once they connect, the digital evidence, the timelines and the, witness statements, right? That's when everything can come crashing down very fast. Now, on top of that, there's another major development investigators revealed. It's now been confirmed that David is not cooperating with law enforcement. When this story first broke back in September, every early report, every headline painted the picture that he was in fact cooperating. And to be fair, it was extremely early in the process. Detectives had just discovered the body. They were still identifying the remains, and everyone was simply trying to figure out what had happened. And that was, at the end of the day, the information that was being revealed. So the story was that he had spoken with investigators in some capacity, and he was in fact cooperating. But now we're learning that this is not the case as of right now. According to a LAPD source with direct knowledge of the investigation, the same source who confirmed that he was a suspect, David has not been cooperating with detectives. This information was directly reported to NBC4 Investigates. And this completely shifts the tone of things, right? Because when someone stops cooperating, especially in a case as serious as this, it impacts how investigators move forward, how they gather information, and how they interpret the timeline. It doesn't automatically mean wrongdoing. It doesn't confirm guilt. I want to make that very clear. But in the eyes of the investigators, non-cooperation from someone who is now officially labeled a suspect, that is very significant. And typically when someone steps back from cooperating with investigators, they start viewing that person differently, okay? It's very natural. Because in most cases, if someone is purely, let's say, a witness, they're willing to talk. In most cases, not all cases, but in a lot of cases, if they're just a witness, they're going to speak up, right? But in this case, when cooperation stops, detectives have to consider the possibility that the individual may be connected to the situation in a deeper way, which of course, we know that David was connected to this in some type of way the whole time. Now, here's what we don't know, okay? We don't know when David stopped cooperating. People stop cooperating for all kinds of reasons. Let's make that clear, okay? Sometimes it's legal advice. Sometimes it's fear of saying the wrong thing. Sometimes it's pressure, confusion, or simply not wanting to be involved any further. And let's be honest, a lot of people don't fully trust law enforcement in general. Even if you're completely innocent, if the police starts asking you questions, your guard is going to go up. That's human nature. I mean, I know for me personally, if officers approach me in a situation where I, let's say, didn't see anything, didn't know anything about whatever it was that they were talking about, I'd be very cautious too, okay? And a lot of people can definitely relate to that. And another thing to keep in mind is the reality of the music industry. When an artist reaches a certain level, there are a lot of people financially tied to their career. Labels, management, teams, partners. So in situations like this, there's often a lot of legal guidance, a lot of caution, and a lot of protection around what the artist says or doesn't say. That's just how the industry operates. But here's where things take a much stranger turn, because according to investigators, Celeste's death didn't happen anywhere near September. It likely happened months earlier in the spring, and that detail changes everything. According to a law enforcement source who spoke to the LA Times, Celeste may have been dead for months, likely dating all the way back to the spring before her remains were finally discovered in September. And if that's true, I mean, think about what that means. It means there's a massive gap in the timeline that nobody publicly knew about. So that in itself raises a whole new set of questions. Where was Celeste during all those months after she disappeared? Who was she around? And how did nobody notice something was terribly wrong for that long? Now, yes, she had run away from home multiple times. We know that, which might explain why her absence didn't immediately set off anyone's alarm bells, right? But that's a heartbreaking conversation on its own that we're not going to go into right now. This spring timeline is one of the biggest twists in the entire investigation because it forces everyone, detectives included, to rethink how this happened. Now let's also address something important. A few days ago, multiple outlets, including Rolling Stone and TMZ, reported that Celeste's body may have been refrigerated or even frozen before being placed inside that Tesla. You might have heard about this news, and the reports said that investigators were apparently exploring that freezing theory and that outside forensic experts were being brought in to help understand the condition of the remains. But now we have an official update, and that information has actually been refuted by law enforcement. And LAPD Scott Williams told reporters that the body was not frozen despite what a lot of media outlets had been saying. The LAPD also put up the following statement saying this: the Los Angeles Police Department is aware of the recent stories posted by various media outlets about the David Celeste Rivas investigation and would like to dispel some misinformation contained in their reporting. The body of Celeste Rivas was not frozen when it was discovered on September 8, 2025. She had not been decapitated. Now, the reason why I'm sharing this with you is because the freezing theory actually ended up going viral. A lot of people saw it, a lot of people repeated it, and for a lot of folks, it became part of what they thought was the truth about this case. And this is why I want you to be very careful about trusting every single detail you see online about the situation and the story. This information, a lot of assumptions and a lot of headlines that don't really match what investigators are actually saying. And I'm not saying that I'm above ever getting something wrong either. I'm human, and if I make a mistake and new information comes out that proves it, I'm always going to come back, point it out, and correct it in front of you, because that's the only way to cover a story like this. It's just the right thing to do. And also, I'm not trying to bullshit you. You get what I'm saying? I have enough respect for you to the point where I'm not going to sit here and lie and make stuff up, and then when I'm wrong, I'm not going to acknowledge it. That's just not how I do things, okay? Now, there's another lead detectives are said to be reviewing, and it points to a location about a 2-hour drive outside of Los Angeles. David's alleged secret trip to Santa Barbara. According to TMZ, who cites a source with knowledge of the investigation, a critical part of the case involves a mysterious trip David allegedly took to a remote area of Santa Barbara County in the middle of the night. Now, I do want to point this out. TMZ uses the phrase last spring, while NBC states in the spring of 2025. So there is a bit of a wording conflict in how different sources describe the timeline. That's something investigators will ultimately clarify as they piece everything together. Personally, I'm going with spring 2025 though, because that's what we know, okay? But that's beside the point. If detectives believe the death occurred in the spring of 2025, which obviously that would make sense, then any unexplained late night travel to remote areas during that same period becomes something they have to look at closely. Does this trip overlap with the window when Celeste disappeared? We don't know the answers to those questions yet, obviously. We don't know what, if anything, investigators found in that area, and we don't know whether this moment ends up being a crucial part of the timeline or just a coincidence that happened during that same period, allegedly. But what we do know is this: investigators are aware of this trip, allegedly, and it's something that detectives are currently reviewing as they try to understand what really happened. And while all this was unfolding, something unusual happened online. As I was going through the public records like I always do when I cover cases like this, I noticed that the information on the medical examiner's website had actually been completely removed. So there's absolutely no information that you can find about it on the medical examiner's website. Up until this point, no one knew why that happened, but after digging further and reviewing new reports and court filings, now we finally have the answer, and this is the truth about that. The LAPD went to a judge and successfully got a court order to seal everything about this, about this case right here, and specifically in relation to Celeste's autopsy. And when I say everything, I mean everything: cause of death, manner of death, autopsy results, physical evidence, the entire findings, completely locked away, at least for now. And the reasoning here gets even more intense. The detective behind this request, Detective Joshua Byers, a veteran from the Elite Robbery Homicide Division, he told the court that releasing these details could jeopardize the investigation, not just by showing what police already know, but by revealing witnesses and informants, interesting, who are actively helping detectives. Meaning there are people talking, there are people cooperating, and police believe their safety could be at risk if the truth comes out too early. So what looked like a random website update was actually law enforcement tightening their grip on the case. And the judge, his name is Craig Richmond, he agreed. He granted LAPD's request, sealing the entire file. The medical examiner's office literally had to stop releasing information to the public, every detail locked behind legal protection. Now, here's where it gets interesting, okay? Even the chief medical examiner himself, Dr. Ode Ukpu, who by the way is the first African American to ever lead that office since it was created back in 1850, he publicly pushed back against this decision, and this is what he said: "The practice of security holds is virtually unheard of in other counties and has not been proven to improve outcomes in the legal system. We are dedicated to serving our community with full transparency. However, the law precludes us from doing so while the court order remains in this case. And he actually denied LAPD's first attempt back in September 15th, about a week after this entire thing came out, right? Saying they didn't provide enough justification. But now that justification has arrived and that hold is officially in place. And the LAPD, they're not really denying any of this, right? A captain from the department explained why, and this is what he said. Detectives need to receive the information before the public does, so nothing leaks that could compromise what they're building behind the scenes. Now, when police is fighting this hard to control information, it usually means they're closing in on something or someone they don't want to be tipped off too early, right? And that brings us to another revelation. In these very same court filings, for the first time ever, LAPD officially described this as an investigation into murder. Now, sure, we all assume that from the beginning. I mean, a 14-year-old little girl found dismembered in a truck, in the front of a trunk, I should say. Of course, that's murder, like somebody did that to her, right? But this is the first time law enforcement themselves have put that exact word into the record, right? So they're not just describing this as a tragic death, and it's not an accidental situation or anything like that. It's officially a murder investigation. I think these developments are significant because of what they really communicate. This isn't just police gathering information anymore. This isn't a wait and see situation, that there are people they're actively building a case around and against, and that releasing the wrong detail to the public too soon could jeopardize everything they've been putting together in silence. The LAPD didn't go to court unless they felt they were protecting more than just paperwork. They're protecting their strategy, they're protecting witnesses, they're protecting whatever evidence they've already connected to someone or more than one person. So you can feel the tone of this entire investigation shifting. I mean, they're definitely turning up the heat right now. And you can see that through their actions. This is a serious, targeted pursuit of accountability. And on this case, he actually said, and I quote, "Accountability is coming. Our robbery homicide detectives have been working and not waiting for that decision by the medical examiner. They are going to get justice for Celeste Rivas." And then he said the following: "No one is off the table, including him." He's talking about David. So that is one of the strongest public signals we've heard so far in this case. Sounds like they're very confident in solving this. So now the tone from investigators isn't "we're figuring things out." It's "justice is coming. Someone will be held responsible. And anyone tied to this in any way is being looked at, including David himself." And through all of this, guys, it's very important to remember the heart of this entire case. A 14-year-old girl lost her life. A child should have had years ahead of her. Laughter, memories, dreams, growth, all of it. Sometimes these stories get so big, so complicated, so shocking that people forget there's a real family behind all of this. There's a real life that was lost. A family that wakes up every day without their daughter. A family that didn't get a chance to say goodbye. It's a real tragedy. And honestly, I wish things could have been different for Celeste. Nobody deserves an ending like this, especially not a child. Okay, I wish we lived in a world where kids were protected, where they were safe at all times, and where stories like this didn't have to exist. However complicated this investigation becomes, however many updates come out, one thing cannot get lost. Celeste mattered. Her life mattered. And that should always stay at the center of this conversation, okay? And I promise you, I will make sure it does. If you found this breakdown helpful, feel free to drop a like. It really helps the channel out. And just on a lighter note, by the way, guys, I actually created a second channel called Mo Speaks, where I'll be covering a lot of different topics outside of cases like this and hip hop and rap and all that. More personal, more commentary, more real life conversations. I'm actually dropping the first video on the first week of December. It's linked below if you guys want to check out that channel. I would love to have you over there. Hope you're having a good day, good evening, wherever you are. And of course, don't forget, guys, most importantly, please don't forget this. So important. Justice for Celeste.
Justice for her. Justice for her. God bless anybody. Make sure everybody is protected and safe at all times. Let the Lord and let the angels be with y'all, if anybody's watching. But it definitely is a confusing case, but there's more information has been brought out. My interpretation is like somebody may have been a part of like his little homicide scheme based on the music video and the song. It could have been just like a role being played. I don't even want to say role. It was more like it was set up that way for her death, and then it's been portrayed as a music video. It's been portrayed as a song, like this wicked dark. It's like a wicked dark fantasy episode, which I don't know too much about dark fantasy, but just my interpretation. Maybe someone is involved, or this was more like a homicide type of tragedy that happened. Um, Portraying this as a homicide, basically, like this little love story, and then bam. I don't know. I had this little interpretation, but I don't want to say too much because I might be just giving my opinion. It might not be exactly what it is. It's a lot of it's a lot of twisted information being passed around, but more than likely, um, definitely want to stick to the center. But so far as like with the investigation, um, just based off the information I've heard from this video, like just interpreting that he is the main suspect in this whole thing, especially when it comes down to the music he makes and the songs that he like the music he makes, the songs that he written or recorded. I feel like those play a huge role too, based on who he is as a person. So most of his music may be also a main target. His music may be also a main his music may also be the main thing to also look at as well. It could probably just give hints and clues about himself on what kind of person he is.